Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Northshire Presents virtual event. My name is David Wood. I'm the event manager at Northshire's Manchester, Vermont location. Before we get started, just a few things to note. As you probably noticed, we are recording tonight's event for Northshire's YouTube channel, but have no fear, only those of us who are unmuted and in this nice little yellow box will be recorded for perpetuity there. So, for that matter, please type your questions into the chat box at any time. I'll save them up and ask them during the Q&A at the end of tonight's event. And finally, before we get started tonight, just a note of thanks. It's been a hard year for Northshire, for independent bookstores, for local independent businesses of all kinds. And we wouldn't be out here without the support that you've given us. And we greatly, greatly appreciate it. All right, now, for what you're really here for tonight. Susan Aposhyan is here for her new book, Heart Open, Body Awake: The 4 Steps of Embodied Spirituality. An accomplished meditator and psychotherapist, she is among the leading figures in the field of somatic psychology. In the 1980s, she joined the faculty of Naropa University and founded and directed the Body Psychotherapy graduate program. Aposhyan went on to create a unique approach known as body-mind psychotherapy. She's the author of the previous book, Natural Intelligence and Body-Mind Psychotherapy. Based in Boulder, she teaches programs and retreats internationally. Her latest open, Heart Open, Body Awake. Let me get the link for that up in the chat if you haven't purchased it already. Has been praised by Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, developer of the Body-Mind Centering, for personally guiding us along a path that can awaken us to our essential nature. While Pat Ogden has said that with authenticity and grace, vulnerability and kindness, she weaves science, body, relationships, and so much more into an especially friendly volume that takes the reader on a journey of personal discovery and expansion. And we are very lucky tonight to be joined by David I. Rome, developer of mindful focusing, an integration of felt sense focusing methodology and Buddhist mindfulness awareness practices. He is the author of Your Body Knows the Answer, which you can order from Northshire right here. He served as the private secretary to Tibetan contemplative master Chogyam Trungpa. Please join us in welcoming to Northshire David Rome and Susan Aposhyan. Please, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Are you going to pin us, David? Should you pin
Let me. You can, as a matter of fact, what you can do is if you put it into gallery view and speaker view is how you can see it that way. But let me go ahead and pin you, Susan. There we are. And let me pin Dave. There.
Great.
All right. Tell us about Heart Open, Body Awake.
Okay. Thank you for having us, and thank you to Northshire. And yeah, I'm just trying to get a view where I can see David. It's not coming up. So I'm going to pin again. And I'm going to pin myself, because I wonder if it's the same for everybody else. Okay. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Those of you. Yeah, it's so nice that you're letting yourself be seen. It's such a anonymous world these days online. People are hiding behind their screens. So I always like to see real people, even if you're busy cooking dinner. And thank you, David, for doing this with me. You know, David and I share a background in terms of Tibetan Buddhism, and then, you know, also being interested in somatics. So it's a rare overlap. So that's what inspired me to ask David to do this with me.
Yes, thank you so much, Susan. It's been a real pleasure. I was aware of your name and a little bit of your work going back to the 80s, I guess. But I hadn't really drunk deeply of it until I had the opportunity to read this wonderful new book that has literally just been published. I thought that I read your biography on your website, which for those who don't know, Susan has a wonderful website with a lot of resources related to her work. But in reading the biography, I was just struck by what a rich and varied life Susan has had, how many experiences in kind of different walks of life, and how she has always evolved, progressed, grown from one stage to the next. And therefore, I thought it would be helpful, especially for viewers who may not be familiar. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Susan's work, but some are probably not. And Susan has published 2 books previous to this one. As David mentioned, one of her important achievements was the founding of what she called body-mind psychotherapy. Susan was and remains one of the leading figures and innovators in the field of somatic psychology, and more than that, as we'll hear. But anyhow, could you talk a little bit about your earlier work, and especially about this notion of body-mind psychotherapy? And there's a way in which some people might feel that contradiction there. Well, psychotherapy is, psyche refers to the mind or the spirit or the soul. It actually has many meanings, but seemingly not to the body per se, in a conventional understanding. Mm-hmm. So how did you how did you develop body-mind psychotherapy?
Well, I have a rather intensive background in psychology because both my parents were psychologists. Uh-huh. And so, we talked about cases at the dinner table. And my father was actually the first psychologist in Virginia. So we came down from New York City. I was a small child when we left. And he got his first teaching job in Virginia. And Virginia, in the, this was late 50s, was a pretty backward place. And, in some ways it's still, it's come a long ways, but it's still more conservative, and it's not rural in the way that Vermont is rural. Let me just say to all you Vermonters out there, it's rural in a very conservative, provincial kind of way. And so in the late 50s, I think when he started his clinical practice, I think he was actually the first practicing clinical psychologist in Virginia. And also he was Armenian and, relatively newly immigrated. And, he didn't fit into Virginia at all, but his attitude was expansive enough that he didn't really care, and he didn't really let that stop him. So So I was immersed in this kind of wild psychological world from childhood on. And I so then naturally developed a sort of psychological mindedness, you know, which is looking at, you know, personal motivation and history and behavior and how they all fit together. So that said, my mother always admonished me, you know, don't become a psychologist. It's too vague. Be a biologist. So I think I kind of did that, both. You know, I think I kind of became a psychologist and also studied the biology of things. And when I, you know, in college, I majored in dance and psychology. And simultaneous with that, I was studying meditation. And, you know, I kept the three separate. I was told by my teachers in all three disciplines that they should be kept separate. Art is art. Psychology is a science, so don't mess it up with anything artistic or spiritual. And in terms of meditation, I settled on Tibetan Buddhism. And, you know, it's very clear in Tibetan Buddhism that you do not edit the teachings, you do things exactly as you're told to do them, and don't muck it up with your ego. So for a number of years, I kept Buddhism, forget it. I kept that apart for decades. But for a number of years, I kept dance and psychology apart. And then I got my first job in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, they wanted a dance therapist. And I had degrees in psychology and dance. So they figured I would know how to do it. And degrees in dance therapy were just beginning to be offered, but I didn't have one. I didn't know what dance therapy might be, could be, had been envisioned to be. But I got the job and I took the job, and it was very powerful experience. I was working with kids in a number of school districts. So I drive around and go to a school district and have these profound experiences with children that really overwhelmed me. And I was very well paid for the time, so I only worked in the mornings. And I'd come home and I'd have lunch in my kitchen, and I'd fall asleep most days because I was so overwhelmed by the experience I was having with these kids. And I'd fall asleep usually at the kitchen table, and I'd dream of all the children, but without any illness or disability. And it was this mystical healing kind of process. But yet, you know, I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I couldn't figure it out. So I quit the job and I went to school in dance therapy.
So let me just ask you, were people talking about somatics at that time?
No, that wasn't a word we used.
Yeah, okay.
This was early 70s, let's say.
Right.
So I went and started a degree at NYU, New York University, in dance therapy. And it was a circus. It was kind of hilarious. One of my professors would come in stiletto heels, and she had a cigarette holder about this long, and she'd smoke. She'd sit there with her arms and legs crossed and give us directions in dance therapy while she was smoking cigarettes. And it was interesting. And I learned that just because I didn't know what dance therapy was, didn't mean that somebody else did know what it was. But I learned about what people had discovered up to that point. And then it was at that point that I moved to Colorado and I started teaching at Naropa. And we began a dance therapy program shortly after that. And I began teaching, even though I hadn't completed my degree. And so then in that context of Naropa University is they call it Buddhist-inspired university. So it's a place where the principles of Buddhism are interwoven with other academic disciplines. So within that context, I began to develop what I thought dance therapy could be. And it was very much based on my experiences, with not just dance, but yoga and body-mind centering and meditation and everything I had studied, body work. I just brought it all to the table, and that's how body-mind centering developed. And then, so let's say, I think I started using that term maybe in the 90s. And yeah, I know I started using it in the mid-90s, body-mind psychotherapy. And so then from the mid-90s till now, I haven't really come out of the closet.
Body-mind psychotherapy.
Yeah, body-mind psychotherapy, whoever said that. Here's my first book, Natural Intelligence. And that's, the subtitle is Body-Mind Integration and Human Development. And then this is the second book, the Body-Mind Psychotherapy book. And the subtitle there is Principles, Techniques, and Practical Applications, which was published by Norton.
Yes.
So that was, a huge accomplishment. Yes. To be published by a publisher of that stature. And then immediately after finishing, so that book came out in 2004, and then I started this book. Mm-hmm. And so that was the beginning of my process of kind of coming out of the closet about how spirituality is also a part of this intrinsic whole, that, body, mind, psychology, embodiment are also intrinsically connected to our spirituality. And that's complicated to talk about from the context of psychology, because in psychological work, you never want to impose your view as a clinician or as a practitioner onto the people you're working with. So, when people would come to me with spiritual issues or share how their spirituality was part of what they were working with, I would enjoy encouraging that exploration, but I didn't feel that it was professionally appropriate to introduce that.
Right.
So then it's been 15 years for me now, or what are we at, 17 years, since the second book, to really feel like I can come out of the closet fully and say, they're all so interconnected.
Yes, yes.
And I have this quote from, I always forget his name, Thomas is his first name. I don't know him, and I don't know his work well. His last name begins with H. Come on out. It's not in the bibliography.
Thomas
Thomas Hora. Thomas Hora, Hora. So Thomas Hora was or is, I don't even know if he's still alive, a psychiatrist. And sometime before the 90s, when my first book was published, he said all problems are psychological, all solutions are spiritual.
Mhm.
And so I put that into both of my first books, just kind of slid it in there, that quote. And I agree with it completely. And right now I'm reading this amazing book. Oh, I don't have it right here. The Awakened Brain. Hopefully, Dafid, you're typing all this into the chat so people can look at it. The Awakened Brain is by Lisa Miller, and she's at Columbia, or she was. The book just came out, 2021. And she's done a lot of brain research on spirituality and religion and depression and substance abuse. And she is able to definitively come out and make the point that I didn't come out with very directly in this last book, Heart Open, Body Awake, where she says, our brain is inherently wired to wake up. We're all living half awake. And some of us wake up. And what she measures in the differences in both brain function and brain structure, she got some structural differences, which is golden in neuroscience. It's easy to get functional brain differences, momentary chemical, electrical brain differences, but she got major structural differences from people that have what she calls a deep personal connection to spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily that they're religious.
Right.
Religion, sorry.
So Susan, it's very generous of you to plug somebody else's new book. And I can tell that you're excited about that. But let's come to your new book. And one of the things that struck me is how you take certain words that have become fairly commonly used, but then you challenge how they're understood and give a much deeper way of understanding them. And so this book, in the subtitle, is on the topic of embodied spirituality. And I want to stay with embodied for a moment and actually read your definition of embodied, because I think it's striking and it's very helpful.
While you're looking for it, David, I'll just say that I've gotten a lot of pushback from the psychological scientific world on my use of the word embodiment. They want it to just mean that we have a body. And, yes, we all have a body, but we all differ hugely in our experience of living in those bodies.
Absolutely. So, as you say in the book, we can define embodiment as the continuous, complete, and free flow of cognition, emotion, and behavior through our bodies. Practically speaking, this means that whatever is occurring within our beings is allowed to organically express itself in our behavior. And that certainly goes to what you were just saying. It's not just about the fact of having a physical body at all.
Yeah. And not just our behavior, but in our physiology as well, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And so expand a little bit on that idea of the free flow. of cognition, emotion, and behavior through our bodies, and we are allowed to organically, it is allowed to organically express itself in our behavior.
Well, our American culture, Euro-American culture, whatever we want to call it, seems to be taking over the world. Contemporary, dominant culture is all about mental first, top down. So we have all, I would, guess that all of us on this call right now have been trained from early childhood, from our first educational experiences, to subdue our bodies so that our brains are our main focus. Sit still, be quiet, and learn by absorbing, remembering, and repeating back. What the amazing thing about the human brain, the cerebral cortex means bark, so the outer shell of our whole brain is pretty much, not our whole brain, the cerebellum isn't included in the cerebral cortex, but most of our brain. The cortex is 7 cells deep. Those 7 cells are all inhibitory cells. They're all cells that take impulses coming up from the brainstem or the limbic system, coming up from below, and say, no, don't do that. Don't say that. Pause, wait, control. They're cells that, in the best, healthiest sense of the word, are associated with maturity, with discernment, with deep understanding. But in the worst use of the cortex, they're cells where we just make ourselves sit still just a minute longer. If you can remember what it was like for some of you to try to sit still in a classroom as a young child, for me it was actually very easy because I'm a very mental person. But for the more physical people among us, it's excruciating and sometimes impossible. Sit still, be quiet. Then as adolescents, don't express your emotions. Don't get upset. Don't cry. Don't yell. Don't be emotional. Don't be sexual. All of these impulses that are coming up from the lower brain, then the cortex can either just, work itself to death to shut them down, in which case it's not available for more creative thinking, or it can allow and slowly learn to buffer. And that's what Lisa Miller found in her very spiritual subjects, is that their cortex is thicker in some areas. So it's performing a buffering function that seems to buffer us against depression and help us be more resilient again in all sorts of adversity. So in terms of our development as human beings and our species altogether, I like to say we're still in our adolescence as a species. We may not make it to adulthood, but fingers crossed. So, we're still having rushes of impulses coming up to our cortical brain, and most of us as adults have just gotten really good at subduing them before we even notice what they are. So we literally can stop our physiology, stop our emotional processes, stop our physical movements, our behavior, what we're going to say to people. We don't just say whatever comes to our minds. we edit heavily. What am I going to say? How am I going to say that? No, I'm not going to say that. Oh, I better not say anything. So we've edited ourselves down to mere shells of who we could be as individuals many times and as a species certainly. All of the crazy things that we're doing as a species, politically, environmentally, I, can attribute to the fact that we've taken this adolescent awareness and shut it down. So it's basically a repressed adolescent awareness is what we're working with globally right now.
So that brings me then to the topic of meditation. Meditation is can be part of the good news in all of this. But conventionally, meditation, this is starting to change now, in part because of your influence, but conventionally it's thought of as sitting really still, no moving. And if there's an impulse to move, well, you just label that thinking or something, and you don't go along with it. You have a somewhat different view about meditation, and tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I have to say that I spent a good 45 years subduing all my impulses because that's what Buddhism taught me to do. And I'm terribly, terribly grateful and appreciative for the influence of Buddhism in my life because, I've learned so much. But I do think that I waited a little bit too long to graduate from what I call held stillness model. So stillness is, a beautiful and profound experience. And I deeply believe at this point, through my personal experience and my work with hundreds of meditators, that practicing held stillness prevents us from penetrating to the deepest, most powerful levels of stillness that we could find that are what I would call a dynamic stillness. So,
movement.
Well, it's not like rocking out while you're meditating.
Mm-hmm.
It's allowing whatever arises to arise while still valuing stillness. Now, sometimes, that said, people are meditating and they're screaming inside or sobbing inside, and they're holding that back. So if it needs to be big and loud, then so be it. And it takes not a lot of work, but a little bit of work to start to discern in yourself, okay, I didn't really need to do that, or, oh, I really needed to do that. I should have done that a decade ago, whatever it is. But, to give people permission to realize there's something more important, perhaps, than meditating right now, whether it's, a physical need, people damage their bodies sometimes with held stillness. They hurt their nerve endings in their feet or, whatever, so I think I need to move my feet now, whatever it is, or an emotional expression, because meditation is terribly evocative. And if it brings up some old pain or experience, and that's not dealt with adequately, then people will just stop meditating. I've had people tell me, I was at this retreat for, however long, and I was completely dissociated and traumatized the whole time, and I didn't tell anybody because I didn't think I was having the right experience. And
Right.
you know, it's very ubiquitous across meditation approaches.
Mhm. So on that note, I want to read a brief quotation and then ask you if you might lead us in a session of meditation, not many hours long, but a brief session of meditation. But here's the quote. Our bodies take on the posture of this struggle. As we become aware of these postural distortions and find a way to be with whatever is coming up for us, our posture relaxes back into neutrality. This is perhaps the central dynamic of meditation, allowing what is already there and relaxing back in neutrality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still agree with that.
Show us how to do it.
Okay. So everybody that wants to participate in this, get comfortable in some way. If you can sit in a way that your whole spine can breathe and move, that's great. Think particularly about your tail. If you're sitting on your sacrum or your coccyx, then sit up a little bit so your sacrum and coccyx can breathe and move. If you're over to one side, find the middle. If your shoulders are tense, relax them down. If your neck is busy doing something, see if you can persuade it that it doesn't have to do anything now. Maybe put your hands here. I'm putting my hands on my jaw and just bringing your jaw gently down and back, feeling the length up the back of your neck, the back of your throat. And feeling your breath come and go from this place, feeling how your breath can move you if you're relaxed, feeling that your breath does move your whole trunk if you're relaxed. And just take a moment to rest in to yourself wherever you are. Notice whatever you notice. And perhaps you notice already stress or tension in your body. Perhaps already you're starting to worry about something with your family or work that's on your mind. As soon as we give ourselves space, then things rise to the surface. As you notice those things, if you notice those things, looking for them, as you encounter them, see if you can release them. Some things are easy. Some things we don't have to examine a lot. We just like, oh yeah, I know that stress, and I can just let it go. Anything you can let go of right now, do it. It's not important. That should be the beginning of any meditation. And ongoingly in meditation, as things arise, if you can let them go, let them go. But if you can't let them go, then attend to them. That's, the first tenet of embodied meditation, that we don't shut anything down that's important. For most of us, our emotional struggles whether they're current or from the past, until they're resolved, they want to be the priority. Just think that thought, see if it's true to you. Take a breath into your body, into your heart. And see how that thought settles into your being. Emotional processing is a priority of being human, of being alive. It's why we're here. We're trying to learn things. We're trying to work things out. We're trying to come to some kind of peace and acceptance of ourselves and of others and of the universe. Just take a breath into that thought. Close your eyes if it's helpful. And really just feeling deep inside yourself for peace and love that wants to emerge, for a connection to your body, to the people around you, to the whole world, to however you envision the power of a larger wisdom. And feel in your body if you can open to that, if you can let go into that. Yeah. And feeling in yourself that this, is all a very long process, and we just had a couple minutes really to do this. But I appreciate having the time to even broach the subject together. And, please give yourself a moment to transition back into the thinking world if you care to. And if you don't, good, keep going. But if you do, see if there's any desire, commitment to go further into your own embodied inner world, your own embodied sense of spirituality, of God, if that's an important word to you, of awareness of universal connection, whatever it is. Because as I suspected when I wrote this book, Heart Open, Body Awake, I think it's innate. I don't think it's individual. And as Lisa Miller has somewhat begun to prove in terms of brain science, spirituality is an innate part of our development as humans. And it's an essential part. But it can't be developed extrinsically. Nobody else can tell you how to find it. So one of the most important parts of embodied spirituality is to find your own path, what's true for you, what's true in your heart, what's true in your relationships and your life and your emotions. It's not just a mental discipline.
So I think this is a perfect point at which to invite questions from our listeners.
Yes, please. If you have any questions for Susan or David, please type them in the chat. I'll save them up and pose them for you. But I've got a question to start things off, Susan. We've got, in Vermont and Manchester, a lot of Buddhists, a lot of practicing meditation experts, and people that go on retreats. But what would you recommend for someone who wanted to start studying meditation and somatic philosophy? Where does someone who isn't familiar with it, what should they do?
That's a hard question. the simple, easy answer that I could give, but it's so promotional, is read the book, But, but
Oh, sorry.
that,
Let me just interrupt, because I should have said this earlier. This book is full of exercises, just very simple, clear exercises.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, my experience is that people find their own ways, whether they go for walks in the evening and, look at the sunset, or if they, sit quietly in their gardens in the morning, um, you know, meditation is certainly a good way. And then how do you open it up so that you're listening to yourself more and you're not trying to follow too closely the instructions that you have been given to meditate? I think there's many approaches to embodied spirituality right now. They don't all use that term, but there's a lot of embodied spirituality in the yoga world, and there's more and more embodied spirituality in the meditation world. But there's also lots in the wilderness vision quest world, and yeah, so really my advice is to go where you're drawn and trust yourself when you get there. And this is not just for new meditators, this is for people that are very experienced in their disciplines, whatever it is, religion or meditation, prayer, spirituality. It seems that this path of awakening is so broad and so deep that I feel like we all need all the help we can get. So follow the clues that are in your in your life. Listen and watch and see where you're drawn. How does that settle, David?
That sounds great. And yeah, I think David had a great point in answering the question too. The book has the great exercises. So Susan, this is a book is in a lot of ways sort of a culmination of decades of your work. What was the process of writing it? How did you get it all in there?
It was a long process. I wrote a few books and threw them out, and I had reams of folders of starts and other starts and different titles and different approaches, and so it was a long process. And inevitably, as soon as I let go of it and it was done, it was like, oh, I wish I'd waited another month. I could have put this in, or this Lisa Miller thing really is a big deal for me, because it's brain structure, and that's a very fixed part of our beings. And, she found the changes from spirituality. So, I felt like I could hint at this is an innate universal part of our beings, but to have a little bit of science to back it up is fabulous.
Let me add here, and again, I hope there's a question about Gurdjieff. But I just wanted to say that one of the things.
Yes, Christy says that J.I. Gurdjieff taught that we have. Go ahead.
That's all right. Well, you go ahead, David. That's better. Yeah.
All right. Well, so Christy's question says, she says, Gurdjieff taught that we have three intelligence centers: mind, body, and spirit. Of these three, he believed our body intelligence is the fastest in regards to recognition and processing. Would you agree?
Well, that's a really interesting point. I never thought of that. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to think about that for a long time, but it's intriguing. The thing about body is that it's our direct experience. Whereas certainly our cognition is indirect experience. Our cognition, our brains can't even feel themselves, They're just gathering data from all of the rest of us. In terms of spirituality, I think I would have to argue that our bodies are our spiritual perceptual mechanisms. It's just a different aspect of body that perceives stress than an aspect of the body that perceives universal love, let's say. So, that would kind of support Gurdjieff there too, because, my experience is we have to really work through all the layers of pain, all the layers of loud stimulus that our bodies are talking to us about, and get through those to be able to hear the deeper, more subtle articulations coming from our hearts, our spirits, whatever, we conceptualize as the bodily basis of spirituality. I think it's our whole beings, but I do think our core and our hearts are the centers of that spiritual perceptivity. How's that sit, Christy?
Thank you, Christy, for the question. David, what were you going to ask?
I was going to say that one of the things that is unique about this book, in my experience, and that really recommends it, I think, is that, and you can sense this just from listening to Susan for the past 50 minutes or so. On the one hand, there are places where it is provocative and where it challenges received truths about things like meditation or whatever it may be. But on the other hand, and even more so, it is evocative and very supportive. Again and again, as Susan was just doing, it is saying to you, well, you come back to what's true for you, to your experience, and let that be your anchor and your guide. It actually took me a while in my reading to really appreciate that. But the more I read, the more I said, yeah, oh, this is good. This is inspiring personally for me.
That's nice. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. We have another question here, Susan, from Martha. She says, how would you apply your understandings of embodied spirituality to someone helping a disturbed child?
Oh, yeah, beautiful question. Well, I think, over time, as we deepen in ourselves, then when we're facing a child in a moment of distress, we're bringing more creativity to the process. We're bringing more heart, certainly, more love, more ability to stay grounded, rooted to the earth, instead of uprooted and dysregulated. And, the first difficulty for all of us always is, the kid's freaking out. I want to freak out too. Stop freaking out. You're freaking me out. I have a friend that's a child whisperer. She's been teaching kindergarten for 50 years. And I was just talking to her about one of my grandkids. And he makes this sound sometimes when he's overstimulated. He goes, like you ask him a question, he goes, He's 5. doesn't want to answer the question, and most of the time I just, it's fine. He doesn't have to answer the question, and he doesn't quite have the words to say, please don't talk to me right now. I'm so overstimulated by what's going on, So, but then I was just spent a long visit with him, 10 days, and my feelings started to get hurt. Like he would just be like, and so a couple times I said, that's kind of hard for me when you do that. And so I was telling my friend, and I showed her the gesture of like, he was pushing away, and I said, but I feel like when I say that's kind of hard for me, I'm kind of going like this into his space. I'm pushing into his space more, and that doesn't feel kind. And she said, yeah, keep it lighter. And she made this kind of rainbow gesture. She goes, just get in there quickly, like, kind words. That was her response. So I thought that was so helpful. And, and I can feel it in my body. Like, it didn't feel right to say, that hurt my feelings. It's like, that's irrelevant. My feelings are irrelevant on that level. On another level, it's very relevant to keep all of our exchanges loving and kind, and to help him learn to do that. So her way of saying, kind words, and then just let it go. And then she said, always come back and, give him a hug and say, I love you so much.
That's really great. Thank you, Susan. Yeah. I'm afraid we only have about time for one more question, and it's from Marie in the audience. She says that this is beautiful and helpful. What are your thoughts about what to do when there's challenges with discipline? And I think she says, rather, I struggle with discipline and meditation.
Yeah. Okay, that's a big, hard question, isn't it? So this is an advanced body question, I think, is the only good answer for that question. Because if you're coming from the mental place with discipline, then you're going into that held stillness. You do this, you do your prayers, you do your meditation, you go to temple, you go to, whatever it is. So you have to really have a light touch. It's very similar to this gesture, kind words. When you feel like, I want to go further, really feel it in your body. And ask yourself, how do you want to go further? What's the right way for you to go further? It's not necessarily what your teachers or what your spiritual discipline is telling you to do. How can you go further in a way that feels true from the inside out? And then discipline becomes an allowing. And that's a big part of the book, is the, working with allowing ourselves to develop as we want to. The trickiest thing about allowing is that we're so habituated in our brains. Brains would rather repeat what you're doing now. If it's keeping you alive, keep doing it. That's the brain's strategy, because it's not in direct contact with your body. So you have to develop that contact, but so that your brain recognizes that it's a consultant to your heart, and that it's clinging to repetitive, safe behaviors is not developmental. So hopefully, that's a quick answer, but hopefully it will inspire you to find deeper answers to that. And again, not to be self-promotional, but there are a lot of discussions of this in this book, so.
Of course it's supposed to be self-promotional. It's an event about your book. Of course. But Susan, David, I just want to thank you so much for creating this space with us all here tonight. It's been a lovely evening.
Thank you.
The book is Heart Open, Body Awake. You can order it at northshire.com in the chat there or in person. And thank you both so much.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody that came. And also, if you wouldn't mind, David, typing in my website, susanaposhyan.com, into the chat so people can look that over. There's a lot of there's a embodied spirituality gatherings beginning in October, so I'd like people to know about that.
Thank you again both so much, susanaposhyan.com, and have a wonderful evening. We'll see you at another Northshire Presents virtual event soon.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Bye.
Okay, thanks, Susan.